Welcome to the Navigating Magic podcast, where we explore the interplay between intuition, ethereal consciousness, and everything in between. I teach beings how to generate change through their attention to energies, truths, and processes that are invisible to others. I'm your host, Natasha Andreo. Hello, and thank you so much for being here for the next episode of my podcast. I'm really excited to share today's episode because it's more of a process for me to help me in my own journey as an animal communicator. And it is my hope and intention that you receive the insight and messages that grief can bring into our lives. If you're watching this on YouTube, I appreciate the likes and subscribes. And if you're on Spotify or iTunes, a subscription and a review does really go a long way, and it's an amazing way to support my channel. A few months ago, 7 to be exact, we lost our beautiful fur baby Romeo, and that's him right behind me here, always watching over me. And losing Romeo was one of the hardest things that I had to experience as an animal communicator, because in a lot of ways, I felt like a failure. I felt like I let him down and I let myself down because I held this expectation that I could help him in a way that the industry, the vet industry, the medical industry couldn't. And losing him in the way that we did really took a toll on me. And I don't think that I processed it in the way that I would have liked to. And it's taken me months to actually come out of my bubble because of this process. And the thing is, it's my hope and intention that I do help you understand grief a little bit better, especially pet loss from a spiritual perspective, because losing Romeo now compared to when we lost our previous bunny before I was an animal communicator are two very different experiences because of my understanding and awareness of the spiritual world. And so I think we do need to bring a little bit more light into this topic, as sad as it is and as heartbreaking that pet death or any death really brings into our lives. It can really impact your mental health, your well-being, your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, and then the relationships around you. It was John Edward in an interview who said, someone had asked him, how do we prepare for death? And he said, we need to talk about it. We need to make this not taboo. We need to make this a topic that is a conversation, because when we're not dealing with it in a way that is healthy, it can cause a lot of ramifications, and unprocessed grief can show up in unhealed ways throughout our body, and our body ends up showing us symptoms. And so grief is more than sadness. When you're sad, you can snap out of it. There are things that can take you to a state of happiness or joy in an instant. But with grief, it's actually a state of yearning. It's a desire for something that is just outside your reach. And until we remap our relationship with that person or that animal that we've lost, we actually stay in that bubble of grief. And we all experience it at various different levels at some stage in our lives, whether you're young, old, and, whether it be a pet or a family member or a friend or a colleague or someone that you've heard of. But grief is love, first of all. And the second thing I want to say about grief is it's not just the death of your pet or your loved one. It's the loss of what could have been. And it's not only the absence of that person or that pet, it's the loss of that earthly potential in our reality. And our grief actually intersects our past with our future, and it hurls us into a painful presence. We face the finality of what once was and what will never be again. And I think this is the saddest part, because sometimes we grieve for the other person or the pet, but in a way we are also grieving for ourselves and what we no longer have access to. And so closure may be a misnomer to close grief, because how do you close love? And I think receiving closure on the death of a loved one can be one of the most powerful and liberating experiences that you can receive. And sometimes it takes years. Sometimes we don't ever receive closure. And if you watched my last episode, you would have heard us speak about how we were asked to let Suti go. And even after she had crossed over, because her soul was still lingering with us. And we didn't want to. That was the most painful experience to have, because we don't want to let them go. And so putting this closure back onto you, because if it's your experience of what could have been, is really important. Grieving the loss of expectations and plans is just as important as grieving your pet or another person. You need to feel it all. You need to honor it. And there may be a worldly better place because, well, your world is now a better place because your loved one was in it. And that when you think about it, when you flip that perspective a little bit, it does help you appreciate what you have experienced with your pet and your fur baby, or your family member in this case, because grief, there is no separation of grief, whether it be a human being that you've lost or a fur baby. And if you're listening to this podcast, I mean, I'm going to make that educated assumption that you're here because you love animals and you have pets yourselves, and you understand that sometimes our pets, the love that we experience from them cannot outweigh the love that any other person can give us. And so what you do with their memory can be a life-changing opportunity for you. And this is where I'm going to invite you to, there are some, strategies that you can implement in order to bring their memory and keep their memory alive. And when you are able to transmute those emotions of grief into love and into motivation, then that is the biggest power you could ever have placed in your heart and in your hands. Because I know that I'm here today sharing this episode with you 7 months later, because Romeo is with me. Only today I was driving home after teaching all day, and a car, a blue Alfa Romeo, literally, I'll post a photo of this on Instagram. It literally overtook me, and the number plates were A Romeo. And for me, I was tossing and turning. Do I record this episode today? I was unsure, and I asked for guidance, and I received it black and white, or blue and white in this case, with the blue car. It was just a special moment for me. And I thank you, Romeo, because our animals do definitely communicate with us. Our animals are here to serve us. They have mastered unconditional love. And so they come into our life to teach us how to attain this unconditional love. They're here to provide us with a new way of living, through the lessons and the experiences that they give us and the soul contracts that we have with them. In the next episode I release next week, I will be sharing with you a really emotional and heartfelt session that Nick and I had with an animal communicator. I think it might have been only 10 days or 2 weeks after Romeo had passed away, just to show you the proximity of love and how we are able to use that as our driving force moving forward. And so going back to the concept of grief, because grief is debilitating, and I'm going to say, if you are not coping with grief, please do reach out and seek help. This is not something that sometimes can be dealt with, just talking about it with other people who understand what you are going through can really be the help that you need, and just the drive to help shift some of those emotions. Now, grief can be likened to, there is a thought experiment that, imagine you're very thirsty. So it's a really hot day. We've been having some beautiful days here in Sydney, and it's just beautiful sunshine. Just imagine a really hot day and you are extremely thirsty. And you see a cold glass of water near you. And so you reach for the water, but somehow it keeps shifting and you never quite get it. that's exactly what grief is, because it's something you're yearning for. You are desiring this. And it's the more that you want it, the more you realize, I don't have it. And that's where the heartbreak comes into play. And so I'm going to share with you now the lead up to Romeo's passing, and how he actually let me know just before he passed that he was going, and how confronting it was to receive this information from him. And so Romeo was our little rescue bunny. I rescued him in 2017. I had one bunny at the time, and she needed a little playmate. And so her and I went bunny speed dating, and we found her a husband. I love telling the story because it's very sweet. And she matched with Romeo on the first go. And ironically, Romeo's name was actually Magnus. And he did not look like a Magnus. He was just this sweet little affectionate fuzzball. And Romeo was a rescue, like I said. And so I adopted him, and I chose to change his name. Now, this is something that does come up in a lot of my animal communication sessions when people adopt pets or rescue new pets. Can I change their name? And the answer is yes, because the name actually encompasses a whole level of frequency and a vibration to their life and to their world. And by changing their name, you're changing the path of their life. And so as soon as I realized, I named him Romeo. Now, I'm an English teacher, and I was, typically obsessed with Shakespeare at one point. And Romeo and Juliet was my favorite thing to teach to my students. And so Romeo was maybe a name on my heart. And it was only a week after I adopted him that I realized I named him Romeo. And I already had a bunny called Raffaella. And so there was this funny coincidence about R and R. And I would always joke about it, like R and R, my two little love buns. And I would think to myself, gosh, I can't believe that their initials are the same. Now, little did I know that 6 weeks after I adopted Romeo, I actually met my real life human Romeo in Nick. And Nick and I, as you know, share the same initials. And so for me, this was a true sentiment and another confirmation of how the lives of our animals, their behavior, their action, their demeanor, and their messages really mirror our reality. And I have a lot more to say about that. And so when I adopted Romeo, he was this affectionate, he just had this presence about him. And it's actually because of Romeo that I was able to believe in love again. I would see the way that he would interact with Rafi, and it was just so cute and snuggly. It would just melt my heart. And the fact that I met Nick 6 weeks after I adopted him just showed me just how powerful the love of an animal is in our lives. And when I met Nick, it was like Romeo and Rafi, Nick and Natasha. It was just R and R, N and N, very sweet, very, suitable. And so Romeo, I've had him now for 7 years. And Romeo was the one bunny that unfortunately was sick often. And he had, because he's a mini lop bunny, he was a cashmere mini lop. That's why he's a furry fuzzball. He had the droopy ears actually can cause a lot of wax buildup in bunnies because the wax has nowhere to go. And so he did develop a cyst in his ears. Now, because of his age, and bunnies are so fragile, as you might be aware or not. And so surgery was, we're trying to avoid that because it's such a big risk for him. And Romeo was at our wedding with our other 4 bunnies, or 3 bunnies at the time. 4 bunnies were our little ring bearers or paw bearers. And there's so many instances over the years when the timing of Romeo's sickness was always reflective of what was going on in our lives. There was one time where we were supposed to go away on a road trip up the northern New South Wales coast for 2 weeks, and he literally got sick the day before we were meant to leave, and he was hospitalized. We canceled the trip. And this is where I'm going to encourage you to start noticing the nuances between your animal's behavior, the times they get sick, and I really want you to put up a mirror and ask yourself, what is this animal trying to teach me? What are they trying to show me? What are they trying to make me become aware of? And for us, maybe we shouldn't have gone on that trip. It's really important that in life, in circumstances, that you really are noticing where the resistance is and stop fighting the resistance, because we need to let go. There are energies in the universe, there are invisible forces working for us, not against us, but we just need to pause, stop the noise, and listen, and go in and follow those prompts. And this can sometimes be a little whisper, or sometimes it's loud and clear. And in this case, it was Romeo's illness. With another time that Romeo was sick was we had just moved in with my mother-in-law, and we moved on the Friday or the Thursday, and he got sick on the Saturday, like 2 days later. And the thing is, your animals, they absorb your stress. They absorb your anxiety and your mental clutter and your your messiness. They absorb all of it. And for me, that was always Romeo. And he caused us, we had just moved. It was a stressful time. It was in the middle of lockdowns. The world was going crazy. And in that moment, it was really important for us to really pause and just be present with him and the other bunnies. Now, at that time when Romeo got sick, this is back in 2020, he had developed a kidney issue. He had elevated kidney response in his blood tests, and it can be a serious problem in bunnies. And so the vet had called us and said, look, we're going to so he spent 3 or 4 nights at the hospital, which is a long time to be without your fur baby. It's really heartbreaking because you just want to help them. You want to be with them. You want to cuddle them. And he spent 3 or 4 nights there, and the vet had said, tomorrow morning, we're going to do a blood test. And so we need basically the outcome of that blood test is going to determine our next result, our next, action. And so at that time, I was doing a lot of energy work. It's because of Romeo that I learned Reiki. I didn't learn Reiki to work on humans. I did it to work on animals. And I was doing the emotion code with him, and all via distance, because energy transcends time and space. And so it was that night, Nick and I sat down. I said to Nick, we're going to do a meditation, and we're going to send Romeo healing light. And it was as simple as that. And I remember the phone was on the couch, or may have been on my lap, and I was laying down and we were listening to the meditation. It was a healing meditation. And out of nowhere, the phone, it was like, I've got an Android phone. So Google Assist said, I'm good, thanks. How are you? And Nick and I freaked out because we knew in that moment that was Romeo communicating to us that he was okay. And that was the biggest confirmation that we needed, because internally we were really, really suffering and trying to maintain hope and be positive. But it's hard sometimes. You have to acknowledge. And the thing is, when we received that note that I'm okay, through the phone, which we didn't even touch, it was everything we needed. And sure enough, the next day, his blood test results came back absolutely fine. And so it was a moment of learning and experience where you really go, okay, there is something here. Spirit loves to use technology. Spirit loves to use animals and butterflies and dragonflies and other insects and birds to send us messages. And so I have made it my mission to understand these and to explore these at a really deeper level. And so ever since then, Romeo has been okay. When we got married, I did a lot of energy work so that none of the bunnies did get sick. And I actually, believe it or not, by working on myself, I was able to help them because, like I said before, your animals actually absorb so much of your energy. And so I did everything in my power to maintain my energy. And the more I worked on me, the better they got. And so we had a long period of time when none of the bunnies got sick. We've got 5 bunnies and they're so fragile, they're so vulnerable. And so we stay on top of it. And I think it's a testament to the work that I do with them, constantly assessing my energy, and then I'm assessing their energy. And so we got married. Romeo was our little pallbearer. It was a really special day. You may have seen some videos and photos on my Instagram. And then towards the end of last year, it was the end of November, early December, we noticed Romeo his behavior wasn't normal. And so we did take him to the vet for a checkup. And it was at this checkup that the vet was, through an x-ray, was able to determine that the cyst in his ears has actually moved and it's now at the base of his skull. And whether they were connected or not, but his kidneys were now, he was in kidney failure. And he had not kidney failure, he'd actually had kidney disease. And so we started him on some really high strength medication. And so he became a little bit more vulnerable. And I remember when the vet every, day would have to test his blood test results. And I remember doing so much energy work that in my mind, I would send his blood, the energy, and I would send his blood the outcome that I wanted. And even though the vet was trying to tell us, it may not come back based on his behavior, based on, his demeanor, it may not come back positive, it always did. It always came back with the outcome that we wanted, because I was doing, like I said, I've taught myself how to do this technique. And so if you want to know what the technique is, I'm going to encourage you to book in an animal communication session with me, because I do need to teach you the parameters of it. It's not something that I want to do publicly through this podcast platform. And the vet did scare us at one point, and just said, you experience Christmas with him. You're going to have, a few more, you're going to get more life out of him, but he is a bit more vulnerable. And so we're very careful, but I basically, through my understanding of the universal laws, I was able to go to that dark place. It's really important that when your pet is sick, or when they're an elderly pet or an aging pet, that we sometimes block things out. And I'm sorry to say this, but when you block out things like this, you actually give it more power. And so I'm going to encourage you, when you do receive bad news from the vet, or there is an outcome that you don't want to hear or necessarily engage with, it's really important that you do face it, because health and disease, they're on the opposite ends of the same pole. And so you do, by ignoring one, you actually give that same thing you're ignoring more power. The way the universal laws work basically amplify the very thing that we're ignoring. Like, you need to face your fears. And I know that I've had people in my own life who have, whether it be a diagnosis for a pet, or even in our human world, in our own human interactions, receive bad news, and they'll say, I don't want to think about it, or I'm not going to talk about it until I get to the doctors, or, and I'm sorry to say this, but it's doing you a disservice. And like we've established at the start of this podcast, it's really important to start opening up and talking about these things and making them a part of our normal conversation instead of ignoring them. And so I think this gave us 6 more months with Romeo. He was 8 years old when he passed, which is, 8 bunnies. A healthy bunny can live 8 to 12 years. And so for me, that felt like an accomplishment. I know that if I didn't rescue him, he wouldn't have had the experiences and the life that he had with us, because your animals do choose you. And I thank you every day, Romeo, for choosing us to be your humans. And so we had moved homes over the New Year, over Christmas, and we got to March. Now, what was interesting about March of 2023 was the energies were starting to get intense. Now, I'm an astrologer, and we had 2 at the time, major planets changing signs. Now, whenever a planet changes signs, it's going to bring change into our lives. And depending where in your natal chart this planet moves, it's going to basically light up that part of your astrology chart, or your real estate, astrology real estate. There are 12 houses, 12 different focus areas. And where the changes take place is like an indicator. It's a bit of a sign, a bit of a roadmap. This is just, this is the area of your life now that we're going to be focusing on. And so I remember vividly when Saturn, who rules time, who rules death, restrictions, boundaries. When Saturn moved into Pisces, which is my 6th house, the 6th house is actually a focus area of that is small animals, pets, your work, your day-to-day life, and your health. And so in March, I had a really heavy workload. I work for a university, I'm a teacher, and I was working really long days. I was having long hours, and I had no time for myself. And again, you have to notice these things because your animals are always absorbing, reflecting, mirroring, and trying to inspire the desired behavior that they want in you. And so at the start of March, one of our other bunnies, Peanut, got sick and he had the sniffles. I mean, it's a real thing. I'm not making this up. He had the bunny sniffles and we had to separate him from the other bunnies because that's contagious. And he had his flu meds and he was all good. A week after Peanut got sick, unfortunately, one day we woke up and noticed that Romeo wasn't breathing right. His nostrils were really flaring and it was quite concerning. I remember picking him up, and when I had picked him up, bunnies, some of them like being picked up, some of them don't. Romeo normally doesn't mind being picked up. When I picked him up, he was going like this, like he was gasping for air, and it really freaked me out. Now, I knew it was a Thursday morning. I knew it was one of my busy days at uni, and I knew that he was telling me, like, you've got to slow down. Your health is going to be affected because through the last year, I just noticed my cortisol levels were elevated, and you do need to take time for yourself. I know when I don't manage my own energy that it shows up hard and fast. And so we rang the vet to say, can we come in? This is we let them know first and said, we need to bring him in ASAP. This is an emergency case. And by the time, I think the appointment would have been at 10 o'clock, we rang the vet at 8 a.m. We had an hour to spare at home, an hour and a half. And so I remember placing Romeo down on the floor and he ran to the sliding door, and we have these vertical blinds. And he stood right in the middle of the vertical blinds. And when he stood in those vertical blinds, I was trying to manage my energy. And as I was doing some deep breathing exercises, he stared at me and he communicated something to me that I haven't shared with anyone yet. As he was standing in the middle of the blinds, the vertical blinds, he let me know that he's in between two worlds. And that I had less than a week left with him. Now, at the time when I received that information, mentally, logically, I go, no, I'm not accepting that. My mind's making this up. This is bullshit. No, I don't agree. I'm not there. I'm going to ignore this because our ego needs to make sense of what's going on. And obviously that's a painful thing. I don't want to experience this pain. I don't want him to be in pain. And so I shut out that thought. And I think through shutting that out, I was in a way thinking I'm helping myself, but in a way I was ignoring what I knew to be the truth. And so we took Romeo to the vet. It was the Thursday, and they were trying to rule out bunny sniffles. They were trying to rule out his kidneys playing up. They were trying to rule out, it wasn't a gut issue because it was a clear breathing concern. And then the last thing that we didn't want to happen was for an x-ray to prove it was something more. And we had to leave him at the vet. Got the call later that day at work. I was at work, and the vet basically confirmed our worst fears that it's his heart. And he had a pneumothorax condition, which basically means he had an enlarged heart. And this is fatal in bunnies. I know earlier this year, there was a bunny, a really famous Instagram bunny called Mr. Bigglesworth. He's from Melbourne in Australia. And he actually had the same condition. And they spent thousands of dollars getting him the top treatment. And unfortunately, he didn't make it either. And so Romeo was diagnosed with this, and the vet just said he has an enlarged heart. Now, I, being the animal communicator that I am, always interpreting the symbols and signs around us, I just couldn't help but laugh in a way at my own misery, just reflecting how, of course, Romeo has an enlarged heart, because that's what he's done to me. He's made me, he opened up my heart to love and to a world that I didn't know existed. And so it was really hard to receive this diagnosis, and the vet let us know how serious this condition was. The vet didn't indicate that we would, lose him overnight per se, but she did say that it's, and we go to the top vet specialist, rabbit specialist in Sydney, and she just said he's in a critical condition. No startling moves, no stress to be imposed on him. He needs to be really, in a stable state condition. And so she wanted to keep him overnight, and we refused. We said, no, we want to take him home. We're happy to bring him back the next day, but we want to be home with him. And so we brought him home overnight on Thursday, and we placed him separately to the other bunnies, and we didn't want him to be alone, so we placed Luna with him. Now, Luna is a very tame, very placid bunny. She's very motherly, very nurturing, often grooming the other bunnies. And so we thought she would be a great fit with him. And she did. She did really nurture him and look after him. So the next morning, we took him to the vet, and they were giving him fluids and just monitoring his behavior and doing some further tests. And we got to pick him up that afternoon, and the vet said, okay, book him in a week's time, and we'll reassess his condition then. Now, I remember vividly, we had booked him in for the following Friday at 3 p.m. And I know how powerful our words are. And so I was doing everything I knew through my, understanding of universal laws and manifestation to hold this positive intention with Romeo's diagnosis. And so I remember vividly saying, I will be here next Friday at 3 p.m. But unfortunately, I didn't use Romeo's name. And so we got to spend the weekend with him. And it was a special weekend because we rearranged our plans to be with him. And I went to work on Monday, and I remember feeling like absolute crap for going to work. I felt guilty. I'm not a mother yet, but I understand now when mothers say, I just feel this guilt about leaving my kids in childcare. And when I left him, I said to him, Romeo, I'll be back later today. Please have a good day. I love you. I'll be thinking of you. I'll be sending you love. I'll be sending you energy. I'll be sending you light. And I came home that night, and unfortunately, I had a work meeting that night. I remember sitting in this work meeting. It was in a Zoom. I sat in the living room just watching him this whole time. And there was this tension that I was experiencing, like, why does this meeting matter? I've got this amazing fluff ball in front of me who's given me the best 7 years of my life. And here I am doing something that doesn't light up my heart. And that was my soul lesson with Romeo, to do things that follow my heart, to always follow my heart. And that was a real hard lesson to learn, because sometimes the lessons don't come in sunshine and flowers and rainbows. And so the next morning, it was a Tuesday, and I fed the bunnies, and I had an early start that day. And I remember telling Romeo, I love you. I'll be here I finish work at 6:30. I'll be home at 7. And he didn't respond in the way that he normally would. And my heart broke that morning. When I left home that day, that was actually the last time that I saw Romeo alive. It was really, I'll never forget it. I'll never forget the last moments I had with him. I'll never forget his smell. I'll never forget the way when I would give him rosemary, parsley, and mint, how the herbs would just make him smell like flowers. Don't ask me how, but there's something in giving bunnies those beautiful herbs that just makes them, their smell is just the most heavenly smell ever. And our sense of smell is actually connected to the limbic part of our brain. And so obviously I will never be able to forget that last memory I had with him. And I remember driving to work that morning, and I saw a number plate that had D33 AD, and it was like dead. And it was like I was getting these signs. And throughout the whole day, Nick stayed home with him. He was fortunate to work from home and teach his students online. I just felt sick in my stomach all day. It's like, you're not the same person, and when you do have a sick pet around you, it's not easy to experience life and to do your normal routine whilst they're in pain, because you just want to alleviate and take away their pain. And so I survived the day. I got to my last class. I started my last class at 5 p.m. And I remember calling Nick just before my class started, and he said, "Oh, you're not going to believe it. Romeo jumped out of his cage and he ran to the garage door." And I was really confronted by hearing that, because Romeo's behavior was, he was slower, his demeanor was low, he didn't have enough energy. But for him to have done that was really confronting for me to hear, because I know, and I've had a lot of encounters with my clients who've experienced this, that your animal actually experiences, they might be sick and really fragile and low energy. They actually experience a spout of energy just before they pass. And this is actually to help their spirit move on. It actually helps their spirit leave their body. And so when Nick called me to say that Romeo ran to the garage door in the living room, my heart broke. And I didn't want to say it, didn't want to be confronted with it, but I knew that that was Romeo's way of letting us know that it's happening. His spirit is going to leave his body. And so when I started my class, it was ironic because the class was supposed to do presentations over 2 weeks. And the way that the structure of this class, I had a lot of flexibility with the way that I could deliver it. And the students actually asked if they could present the following week. And so I said, yes, sure, that's fine. And I remember telling the class, okay, there's a reason that you're presenting next week. And this is why your words carry weight. Your words manifest. Your words have so much power. And so I started the class. We rearranged the presentations for the following week. And then 20 minutes into the class, or maybe half an hour, I don't even remember the time, I looked down at my phone and I had 5 missed calls from Nick. And it's like I knew. You don't need proof. You don't need to hear it from someone else. You just know. And I called him back, and Nick was in tears, and I couldn't understand his words, but he just said, "I'm sorry, he's gone." And it was the hardest thing to experience, because I was at work and I wasn't at home with him. And I don't think I've forgiven myself for that. It's been a really hard thing to come to terms with. And it was a shock. It was whether you're like when grief hits you, it's never easy, whether it's something that's a shock and it comes suddenly out of the blue, or whether there's an impending grief, an impending death, an impending crossing over. And so a part of me was torn, like, how could this happen? I saw him this morning. He was there. He was smart, he was eating. He was okay. And then just to hear that, just like that, he was gone. And I don't know how I got home that night, but I remember running into a colleague and she walked me to my car. I thank you, Kylie, for doing that. And I remember walking past the florist shop at Broadway, and there was sunflowers just staring at me. And so for me, sunflowers is my sign from Sooty. Whenever I see sunflowers, that's how I know that our other bunny that passed is sending us signs. And so I'm like, oh, let me just buy some sunflowers. And so Kylie bought me some sunflowers, and I drove home that night. I don't know how I got home. I don't ever encourage you to drive in when you're crying and in a state of grief and sadness, because it's actually really dangerous. And so I knew that I was going through this state of denial and shock. And you may have heard of the 5 stages of grief. The first one being denial and anger, bargaining, depression, and then acceptance. I think in that initial state, I was in denial and I was angry. I was angry at myself for being at work. I felt guilty, like I should have been at home with him that day. And so I remember coming home. Now, I don't want to go into details about, what I saw, but it was really confronting, I guess, seeing the absence of life force. We talk about life force, when someone has an amazing life force, their energy radiates, it's contagious, and your animals have this activated life force. Just by being in their presence, you're immediately centered and calm and grounded. And so having this removed was really confronting. And so the next morning, we did a beautiful little ceremony at home, sharing our precious memories with him. And it was really important, I think, for us to do that, because it did help us, number one, say goodbye to him, alleviate some of the sadness, but also receive a little bit of closure. And so with bunnies, you actually have to leave their body out. And so to help the other bunnies come and say goodbye to them. And so I remember just feeling the sadness of the other bunnies, sniffing him, grooming him. And you're supposed to leave his body there for as long as possible. And the other bunnies will basically hop away when they're ready. Because too often when you have companion animals and they've lived together for a long time, we're too busy thinking about our own grief and we forget their grief. And so it's really important that you give them the opportunity to say goodbye as well. Now, I know as an animal communicator that Romeo would have told them that he's leaving. And, and I know that there are many, many instances in our home and household where there's been signs that he's around, and I still hear his pitter-patter. I still receive, a whiff of his smell and all the beautiful signs and symbols that I need to receive from him. But I want to assure you that your animals communicate to each other and they pass messages on to each other. Your animals are the OGs of spirituality. They know it all. They experience it. And so seeing them say goodbye to him, I think that was sadder to witness than it is thinking about myself, because all I could think of was how they're going to cope and how they're going to cope with his loss and his absence. And so this was now the Wednesday. We placed Luna back in with the other bunnies in the playpen, and the four of them were, I guess, every time we'd walk into the living room, they would stand up. It's like they're looking for Romeo. They know that there's one missing. And we got to the Friday, and I'd gone back to work straight away. And again, this is a guilt that I'm experiencing because I just, pet loss, you really need to take the time to grieve. You're in a bubble. You're not in the same state. You're operating from a lower vibration. And I didn't give myself, I thought, from a logical perspective that it was okay for me to go back to work, that it's going to distract me. But it's so important to go to your emotions, to actually feel them instead of numb them. I mean, people find many ways to numb their emotions and pain, whether it be drugs or alcohol or addictions. And I guess for me, it's work. It's how I cope. And bringing that to my awareness has been a real learning curve for me, because it's helped me put up some boundaries moving forward. And I have Romeo to thank for that. And so we got to Friday, and then we noticed that Luna, the bunny that we placed with Romeo, she wasn't eating. And bunnies are grazers. They're like cows and sheep. And so they need to eat very often, almost like 24 hours a day. They need to have access to food. And so for her to not eat was serious. We knew that this could, lead to other serious problems. And bunnies, like I said, they're very fragile. And so we did all the remedies at home to try to boost her appetite. I tried to do energy work, but I didn't think I had it in me because I myself wasn't in that state. It's really important as a healer that you understand that when you are not in that state of flow, in that blissful, energy state, you cannot give of something that you don't have yourself. And so we were avoiding going to the vet. We don't want to make the call. Don't want to go. That's the last place in the world I want to be. And then it got to about 11 a.m. and Nick said, Tash, I'm going to make the call. We need to go in. And so we rang the vet. We let them know. And they said the only available appointment was 3 p.m. And that was Romeo's original appointment. And I was really upset at myself at that point, because I remember when I set the intention, and this is why I teach my clients, your words are so important. Your intentions matter. Your intentions can be thoughts or words you say out loud or things you write down. Don't ever underestimate the power of the word. And in that moment, I was so upset at myself, because I remember setting the intention that I will be here next Friday at 3 p.m, except I forgot to say Romeo's name. I wasn't specific enough. And I think learning this has helped me, I guess, specify and become a little bit more specific with my own manifestation journey moving forward. And at that moment, I was dealing with Romeo's passing, and at the same time, dealing with Luna, who was now sick. And so we went back to the vet, and I remember our vet, Dr. Tegan, looked at us and just hugged us, because she had treated Romeo over the years, and it was just the saddest thing. And I remember looking at her and said, this was Romeo's original appointment. And she looked at me and said, I know. And I think a part of me just wanted to express that maybe it was Romeo's way of telling us that he's still with us. And when the vet assessed Luna, this is the saddest thing ever. She was actually diagnosed with grief. And that's why there was no other explanation for her inability to eat and why she was low in energy. And it was just a real confrontation to the fact that I hadn't processed my grief in that initial shock. To go back to work straight away was not healthy for me, and to ignore what I was feeling. And Luna's behavior was actually mirroring that back to me. And I think this is a really important talking point, because sometimes when people have pets pass away, we don't know what to say. We don't know, whether they want to talk about it or not. And I think being just present with other people, with even people who have loved ones that have passed, sometimes just thinking of you is one of the most beautiful things to say. And it was in that moment that, there's this realization that grief is like a phantom limb. You may have heard this is actually a scientific phenomena, where people who've had their limbs amputated still feel that part of their body. And when we think about grief, it is like a phantom limb, because we can still feel like that part of us is still there, but they're not there. And I think it's the absence of that which causes us to distance ourselves from other people. And I think that's what happened to me in months, even after Romeo's passing. And one thing that I can say and confirm is that, like, those that we have lost become our guiding steps, our shining stars, and they continue to send us signs. And they are leading us to where they are patiently waiting. And so the Rainbow Bridge is a place where I wish we had visiting hours for. I wish we could, alleviate our own pain and our animals' pain through the process of grief and healing and all the available modalities to us. But as an animal communicator, I know in my heart of hearts that your animals can do more for you on the other side than they can in this lifetime. And since Romeo's passing, and after being confronted with Luna's, suddenly getting sick just 3 days after Romeo's passing and her diagnosis was grief, it was a real wake-up call for me about what really matters in life and pursuing the things that set your heart on fire. I mean, life is too short to be worrying about the little mundane, just BS that we're confronted with. And so Romeo has been able to help me restructure my boundaries that I've put in place in my life, the things that I've put in place with my business. I mean, Luna getting sick was a real mirror reflection back into how I don't put my feelings first. And so how can you give of an empty cup if you don't have your cup filled? You cannot. It's impossible. And so there's been such a big growth for me, such a big learning process of understanding how when I can work on my own energy and manage my energy, that I'm able to give so much more of myself. And so ever since Romeo has passed, there's been some changes that I've implemented in that regard, but also I've received so many signs from him. Just the other day, Nick messaged me and said he was just thinking of Romeo, and then this car overtook him and he had the number plate magic in it. And then Nick used to always say, Romeo is our magic boy. And so he had messaged me while he was driving, said, oh my God, you're not going to believe it. This car just did that. Then 3 minutes later, I get another message from Nick, and he took a photo of a number plate, and the number plate was Love You, T. And it was like, whoa, that's Romeo playing games with us. Now, I remember I was driving into work at that same time, and I thought, I felt jealous. Like, why is Romeo going to Nick? I want to experience you, Romeo. And then there was a big truck. I didn't receive it, sorry. A truck drove right past me, and it was Romeo's IGA. It was a big fat truck, and it was just this, wow, I didn't get the little number plate. I got the big fat truck. It was so blatantly clear. And so I'm going to invite you. There are ways that you can communicate with your animal and receive signs from them. And one of the best ways is actually through your dreams. And so you can do that by just before you fall asleep to set an intention that I will receive a message from, and then you say your pet's name and you say the word tonight. Now, I want you to keep, if it doesn't happen on the first night, I'm just going to say it probably did, but you need to train your conscious mind to receive the messages from your dreams. That's first of all. And secondly, keep repeating it night after night. And as soon as you wake up, these are the best methods that you can try in order to remember your dreams. The first one is, as soon as you wake up, you keep your eyes closed. That's really important, because as soon as you open your eyes, you actually lose 70%. Your memory just dissipates in terms of your dreams. So keep your eyes closed, and then try to remember as much as you can. And then I'm going to encourage you to keep a dream journal by your bedside, whether it be an actual physical notebook or notes in your phone, whatever works best for you, because you remember it in the moment as soon as you wake up. Because as soon as you wake up and then you start thinking of other things, you can forget the dream. And so you want to keep training your mind in order to receive the messages from your dreams. And so I've had a lot of dreams of Romeo. When I ask for dreams and I ask for messages and I'm asking for guidance on particular issues and areas of my life that I'm needing guidance on, I receive it. And in my dreams, he's able to talk to me. Sometimes he shows up as a little bunny. Sometimes he shows up as like a form with a voice. And I know that that's him. Another way to receive messages from your pet is whenever you are needing their help is you just ask. Now, there are two things you need to do in that moment. The first one is to say, I need your help, say their name, and then say the word now. Now, the reason that we're using the word now is because in the afterlife, there is no such thing as time. Time is a human construct. It's an earthly construct. And so in the other life, in the worlds beyond our own here, the time has no factor. And so when you say, I need your help, they can deliver the help, but it could be in our human world next week, or it could be the day after, when you're probably needing that help in that instance. And I can't tell you the amount of times that Nick and I have tried this randomly, and then you will receive a butterfly, you'll receive a bird, you'll receive a message. You might overhear a conversation, a song on the radio comes on. There are many, many ways that we can, receive these messages. And so it's really important that you are attentive to what's around you. Sometimes I've even taken it to another level where I ask Romeo for guidance on a particular concern or issue, and then I receive the information intuitively. Now, when I receive the information, and I'm going to encourage you to try this, it's so important to trust the first bit of information that does come through. Because there's been moments where I've been sitting in the living room, I might be working on a project behind the scenes, and I'll be thinking of Romeo, and I would ask him, like, it's almost like I've made a muse out of him, and he's my go-to, my mentor, my teacher, because really your animals are your best teachers. They really are your best mentors and leaders in your life. And when I have asked, there was a few moments where I asked him for guidance, my RoboVac, who I don't know how, will say, I'm here, and I haven't touched my app. I haven't, gone near the RoboVac to activate it, but it will randomly say, I'm here. And that's how I know that Romeo is with us. He's in our home. And I'll talk back to the RoboVac like, okay, thank you so much, Romeo. Thank you for being here. And then I'll turn to the bunnies, and their behavior and their demeanor is like, they get very curious, and it's like they feel his energy and his presence in the home, which is really special. And so I want to, say that grief, animal passing is never easy. And do encourage you to reach out and get support where possible. But it's my hope and intention that we make this a conversation that's open, because like grief doesn't respond well to antidepressants, because grief wants to come out. Grief wants to show itself. Grief will, sometimes it can take up to 2 years for us to actually overcome the stages of grief. So there's a lot to, remap our relationship with that person, event, or pet in our life that we've lost. So that's a really important note that I want to make. I really thank you for listening to this episode. I encourage you to reach out. I would love to hear your stories. It's my favorite thing, connecting with animals. They have so much insight, so much awareness. And I'm going to encourage you to stay tuned for next week's episode, where I'll be sharing with you our interaction with Anna Marie Ellison, who connected with our Romeo in our raw and vulnerable state just after he'd passed. Thank you so much. And until next time, all my love. Wherever you're listening from, if you can give us a review and a 5-star rating, that would be so helpful in supporting this podcast. If this episode lights you up and inspires you, then please make sure that you share this podcast and make sure that you tag me on Instagram. I am beyond grateful and so blessed to call this work. It just means so much. Together, we will learn and grow. Staying anchored in your heart means staying anchored to your humanity. All my love, Natasha.